want to ask Grant and Axel to give some insights into some of the lessons from Dr. Phil and how they've made a difference specifically at both of your companies. Grant, let's start with you. So yes. How has the lessons, things that you've learned from what Dr. Phil's been working on and what he teaches, how has that made a significant impact at Royal Caribbean?
Well, I do have to say, just a preface, there are many, many different tools that Dr. Phil and Consalia have put together that we've learned throughout the Sales Masters program, but the mindsets are the foundation. And so that's where you start. And one of the biggest learning factors for us was, I almost challenged it. So we took what Dr. Phil taught us and we thought, that can't be at Royal Caribbean. You know, in his research, it comes down to less than 10% of salespeople are effective at their jobs. And that just hit us. And I just thought that can't be true. Maybe that was 10 years ago when he did his global research to earn his doctorate, of which he did. And so we hired an external entity to go out and interview 160 of Europe, Middle East, and Africa travel agents, our B2B customers. And we were shocked to find out that less than 10% of salespeople are effective at their jobs. Exactly what he taught us in the master's program. So then that helped us to reorchestrate the framework. How would we build our digital sales academy? And everything that we did has to be tied to the positive mindsets so that we're not promoting people to behave in the negative frameworks that people don't want to be sold to. It was really, truly eye-opening. So everything that we built in our sales academy matches to that. And again, that's just one facet of the many tools he taught us.
Very good. So Axel, you know, SAP, have historically been in a very competitive space. You know, I know somebody who's a VP of sales for public sector, and he's in the space where you are, and he calls it the NFL of sales. You know, the solutions that you're in, what he's been known as the ERP world, et cetera. It's, you know, big choices, risky solutions for customers to make the decisions. So, you know, there's so much complexity in your particular marketplace, complex software. Talk a little bit about the transformation and how you've been able to enact that based on some of the lessons that you've learned.
I fully agree with the analogy of sport in that case. I guess we are high-performing sales teams here. It's a very high velocity type environment we need to work on and very complex type of solutions that we are selling. The issue we have, or we had, and we still have with salespeople is that especially sales managers were the best salespeople. So when they need to adapt or to a new environment, they will rely on their experience. But as Phil said at the beginning of the call, the environment is changing so fast that your experience doesn't actually remain the best basis for the future. Especially at SAP, moving from on-premise sales to the cloud has been a massive shift. And to get our sales manager to embrace cloud was a very big transformation, right? It requires much more than skills. You need to rethink the way you engage. And what we see, back to the values, if you don't follow the 4 mindset, you are starting losing trust. What's funny is that in the cloud market, trust is key. Trust and loyalty are the 2 things you're looking for. So when you try to establish trust, you cannot fake, you need to be authentic, right? You need to be really customer-centric, otherwise it will be felt as being not authentic. And that is more beyond the technique of sales that Phil was referring to. So what we see is that I could work and collaborate with Consalia and with Phil and getting those 4 mindsets to start shifting the behaviors and the mindset of the sales managers in order to embrace the values of the new cloud engagement. And this is key to us because unless we bring this trust to the sales cycle, the loyalty and the adoption of our solutions will not be successful. But the second point, which for me is absolutely key, is innovation. I don't believe any company today can survive without innovation. Innovation is not a technical stuff, it's a mindset thing. Right? So there is a point where you need to go back to your mindset, understand how you can become innovative. And that's where tactful audacity and proactive creativity comes in. So on the one hand, you have trust. On the other one, you have innovation. And that's what the 4 mindsets are bringing to the table. So that's what we brought to the sales managers.
And I love the way you talk about the shifting nature of how people are selling from being perhaps traditionally more product solution centric versus more customer centric. And this links a little bit into the doctorate that I did a number of years ago, which is based on how do customers want to be sold to. Mm-hmm. And one of the really quite staggering statistics that came out of part of my research was the percent of salespeople that sell in a way customers want. And the percentage figure was really quite low. It was of 80% of the many people I interviewed all over the world, less than 10% sold in a way they wanted. And the reasons that they gave were very much linked back to what you were just saying, that the ability of salespeople, I don't know if it's ability or whether it's the way they're driven by the organizations for whom they work, but it's the ability of salespeople to know their business, to understand their business and how they work. There was a wonderful quote from one of the people I interviewed. He said, I want a salesperson, obviously from a vendor, but I don't want him pointing at me. He said, I want him pointed back inside his own organization. I want him to leverage my power and my weight as a buyer back into his company as a supplier in order that I can get a better deal, across all points of engagement. And this idea of, again, driven by customer insight about how they select salespeople who can do that, who can bridge that gap between, what they need and then leveraging, whether it's directly or indirectly through experience with other customers, like you were mentioning, is quite rare, according to many of the customers we've interviewed. So I love the fact that the sales role is so important, isn't it? It's where the rubber hits the road. They're closest to where the customers are. Yet they have to fight so hard internally sometimes to get what they need for the customers.
Yeah. And I would say this, when I think of sales, I also think of customer success, account management, like anyone client facing, because at the end of the day, they're advocating for the customer, but they're also, keeping the business in mind. When I think about how we equip folks to be successful in navigating customer relationships and customer conversations, it is a blend of how do I provide you with the business acumen to make good decisions and recognize pivotal points of trust and credibility in the deal or in that relationship. And so a customer wants to hear from someone who is going to be thoughtful about solving the problem, is going to feel like part of their team, is truly an ally in fixing this. Because oftentimes, at least in technology, if you're buying technology, careers can be made. Implement a great technology and that buyer gets promoted. So really being aligned to them and supporting them in what they need in their organization is key. But I think a lot of businesses think constantly throwing information at folks as if they aren't equipped to navigate the customer is what we do. And so when I think about, the times that I had to be a great seller, I had one leader who was awesome in coaching me and really spent the time going, what I want is for you to sit in front of a conversation and understand the pivotal points that you can build a bridge, the pivotal points at which you can offer value. So everything else needs to almost be second nature. I need to know my product really well. I need to know their solution really well because it needs to become familiar to me so that when I see something, I can offer insight and I can continue that conversation. It's not giving me what insight I should offer. It's not telling me exactly how the solution is solved. It's being thoughtful with the customer in order to arrive at a solution that's best for them. And that's when, you talk about price or how you're going to do it. But without that trust that I understand the problem, we will never move forward. And so I always think if we hire really smart people in customer facing roles, usually, and we need to empower them to be confident in their ability to partner. And when we see challenges, coach them. But it's not, they need to be constantly in school because realistically, jobs are learned on the job for the most part. Experience comes from, moving with more customers. And when we think about that confidence that a customer wants, they usually want someone who's worked with lots of folks, right? They don't want someone brand new. And so the fastest way to build credibility with the customer is to say, I've worked with a customer like you, or I've actually seen this industry before, or actually I know someone who had this same problem. And the only way they're going to get to that is doing it more, but also feeling confident in navigating those. So
that's interesting.
Want support in getting their goals and their needs met. And we have to bridge that delta between we are a profitable business, we want to do that, and what is that worth to you? But not just, here's what I have, please buy it.
We'll delve into things like mindset and stuff like that. But in that research, was there anything for you at that time that was unique or was it something you intuitively kind of knew, but it was just verified by some of your customers that you did some research with?
I think it's a really good question, because you can start off your research project with a hypothesis of what you think the answer is to a particular nutty problem that you're trying to solve, and use your research to say whether you're right or wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
That wasn't the approach that I took. I didn't go in with a hypothesis. I went in simply with a question, which is abbreviated to how do customers want to be sold to, without a hypothesis, but of course with bias, because you've been taught, you've been through multitudes of different types of sales training programs over the years, and of course the lens through which you look at the data is influenced by your experience and how you've been trained. And what I realized sort of halfway through the doctorate was how my bias was stopping me from seeing what customers were really saying. And I feel rather ashamed to share that with you, because, we're taught to question, we're taught to listen and all of that. And I thought I was a good listener and I thought I was a good questioner. But actually, I did this workshop with a professor from London Business School, where I brought buyers and sellers together, and we looked at the data that I'd accumulated over a 2-year period of interviewing many, many, many buyers across the world, in fact. And we came up with this flip chart page summarizing what were the key learnings. And the key learnings were, we need to be good at questioning, we need to be good at listening, we need to be good at this. And I thought, there's absolutely nothing new here. And I almost jacked it in. And then I realized that I had a lecture at the university talking about research techniques. And this lady asked me, Phil, what are your values? And I remember listening to the question, and I spilled off a few, like, we often do, sort of integrity and family orientated and whatever. And I realized I'd never seriously considered my values, and she was making a connection between values and bias. And once I started that journey, I then realized what my bias was, and I re-looked at the data through a completely different lens.
Wow.
And interestingly, that lens took me into the area of values, and the values that customers are looking for from salespeople. So not to do with competence or process or methodology, but values. And I borrowed some ideas from an academic called Howard Gardner. He's quite well known around the emotional intelligence kind of field, linking values to mindsets. So if your values are strong enough and you live them, they become a mindset. And so this then drew me into defining the kind of, from the data that I got from the customers, well, what was the data telling me about the values and mindsets that they look for from salespeople? And I have to say that completely changed our entire approach to the way we have started to develop salespeople and sales leaders as well. The premise is simple. If the values are right, the right behaviors will follow. So if I have a value that is based on curiosity, if it's a real lived value, what am I going to do? I'm going to question and I'm going to listen. Yeah. So these values were, if you like, the operating system. And on top of the values that you have apps that sit, the application sits on an operating system. But the premise that we had was, if we embed the right values, then the apps, the way people deploy their behaviors, competencies, learning, is going to drive the right kind of behavior. And we had control groups going on with different clients, where we took people through projects where we taught them what the values were, and we got them to express them in the way they sold, and compared them with those that didn't. And that proved the ROI of going down this particular route to us. And then, the rest is history, really, since then. I mean, maybe you've shared many of them already in the storytelling that you've done, but What for you, for someone in your kind of role as a large deal, business development director, what are the critical skills? What are the critical attributes do you think you need to have to be successful in the role that you're doing?
We've kind of touched on them, I think. I think it's that being able to be genuinely interested in the client, wanting to listen to what they're telling you and taking that information away. And I think one of the drivers for myself has always been, authentic, and hopefully always authentic, but also always wanting to add value. And that requires you to genuinely invest yourself into the client that you are trying to secure from a business development perspective. So really trying to understand their world, listen to what they're telling you, and then being able to look at the business in which you're operating on and saying, can we add value? And then questioning what they've told you based on the knowledge that you have, your knowledge of your business, what's going on in the marketplace, so that you can really come back to them with something that truly adds value. And that, like I say, and be bold. It's very comfortable and very easy just to follow the line of saying, well, okay, yeah, they've asked for this. If I deliver them that, then they'll be happy, because I've fulfilled the brief. I think where I've been successful in the past has always been, okay, if what they've asked for absolutely makes sense, then fine. But be that critical friend, challenge them, and also challenge your internal stakeholders as well. Yeah. The amount of times, I suppose the other thing I'd say is never take no for an answer. I joke to my colleagues all the time of saying my world is grey. It's not black and white. It's just different shades of grey. And as a business, we are in a very different place than we were 3-4 years ago. And I think because some down to myself and some down to other colleagues of constantly pushing. And when we get a no, it is trying to understand, are you saying no because it's hard, or it's a little bit scary, or just don't want to do it? To me, they aren't good enough reasons. Sometimes a no means a no. It could just be that you say, well, okay, that clearly just cannot happen because of X, Y, and Z. And often I'll say to my colleague, explain to me why then. And you can understand, you can kind of weigh, okay, yeah, I absolutely get that. That means the no is a hard no. It can't be done. But sometimes you can look at it and say, well, okay, well, if we did this, would that generate a better outcome? What are the challenges associated to that? And it could be, I don't know, a more senior stakeholder. So they need to get their approval. And then, okay, well, I can help facilitate that conversation. We'll go together. We'll have that conversation and we'll see the challenges up. And I think the businesses, luckily, we're the business, and we're certainly within Willpack, and Bunzel is that desire to innovate. So I would also say, challenge a no, be it from a client or from internal stakeholders. Be prepared to question and to push, because you never know what the outcome may be. It may be an absolute better outcome than you had. And I always have in my head, I use this a lot, so it'll resonate, I think, with some of my colleagues. I talk about Roger Bannister in 1954 doing the 4-minute mile. And the thinking at the time by all experts were saying a human cannot run a 4-minute mile. It's biologically impossible, and it can't be done. It was only when he ran that 4-minute mile that it was possible. And within a year later, 3 people, bearing in mind it was impossible up to the point that he had done it, 3 people then ran a 4-minute mile a year later. So the only thing that changed was it was now possible. And I think that's I always think that's quite a powerful story. That you should drive. I don't know if I've necessarily answered your question necessarily, but
no, I think you have.
It's that desire to push.
Yeah.
For the, if you like, the general public, most people's interaction with them are are not necessarily the same interactions as you would have at the big deal pursuits. It's a very different process. It's a lot more complicated, and as buyers are becoming increasingly more sophisticated, and it is interesting how the professionalization of buyers and the SIPS courses and so forth that they can go on.
Yeah.
Sometimes there isn't that counter training for salespeople.
No, there isn't.
There are
No,
lots
there
of
isn't. I
salespeople
mean,
out there, but there isn't those real professional, recognized bodies out there. Well, there are, but there's not that many.
Yes. Well, I mean, that's clearly an area in which we've been sort of wanting to professionalize, and our journey into this large deal pursuit phase started with the doctorate research, which in itself was fascinating, but I'll maybe refer back to that later. But actually, the people that I worked with, there was a core team of about 12 people, were so interested in the process of doing the academic research around improving professional practice in sales, that they asked if we could create for them a bespoke master's program for their team. And because they recognized, I think, just like you, that there's no formal qualification in this area.
Yeah.
And this is where our journey into the master's program started, back in 2009. And it wasn't something that we did as a company at the time, but we said, why not? We spoke to Middlesex University, and we created our first master's program, and they put 6 people through that program, some of whom I hope will be part of our trilogy series as well. So, and that for me was really interesting, because I didn't anticipate such an interest in what academic learning can do. And you're quite right. Procurement have been doing this much longer than we have in sales. The SIPS courses that you can do an MBA in procurement, actually. I think that's been around for 30 years or so, and yet sales, the professionalization of sales in the context of large deal pursuits, well, I actually think we run the only masters in it globally. No one else is doing it. So anyway, we need more people out there to follow what we're doing, really, to get it established as in the psyche. But it's interesting what you should say about this sort of gap. I was just thinking of a story that one of our students was sharing about, he was a very successful account manager, and then he got promoted into a sales management role, and he was joining our master's program, and on the master's program, and he was doing a reasonable job actually as a manager with about 7 direct reports, and it was in a field that he knew quite well, and they did do well. But then he was promoted again within 9 months to being a sales director with 3 or 4 line managers then reporting to him, with a team that had been high performing maybe 5 years ago, but now was one of the worst performing teams, with people who were also much older than him, more experienced. And he sort of describes the journey that he went through trying to take this underperforming team of highly cynical salespeople who didn't see what this young whippersnapper could do to help change things. And it was very interesting seeing him develop his management approach. He had to learn extremely quickly about this transition from being, a super salesman into a super manager. Because he only had 9 months to make it work, or else he would have been fired like his predecessor was fired.
Wow.
After 7 months. But it's so different, the role of management to the role of sales. And I could talk more about this particular story and what this individual did, but it plays into all the things we talked about coaching, about curiosity, about psychological safety, about building a vision. It played into all of those kind of spaces, and it was an amazing journey he took. And he's now the managing director of one of the Salesforce companies in Europe. He's done incredibly well with his career. But I often think of him in those early days talking about his struggle with what leadership was and what it wasn't. It was a slightly different approach because he realized these guys had a lot of experience. They had a fixed mindset as opposed to a growth mindset, I think, which was and so his challenge was how to take someone with a fixed mindset and make them switch to having a growth mindset. And he took the view, and there may be other ways of doing it, which is that he can't do that by being directive. He couldn't do it by saying that this is what you need to do. And so what he did was that he had a 30, 60, 90-day plan. And in the first 30 days of his plan, it was all about getting a sense check of where people were with their personal mindsets, and using that, the output of that, to then drive a vision. And he wanted to connect them back to what they did well when they were the top performing team. And he used an approach called appreciative inquiry. I don't know if you've heard of that, with Cooper Ryder, which is discover, dream, design, develop. So discover, 30 days, ended up with dream. How do we get back to the things that we did, all those? And he really got them to tap into what it was like. And as part of the dream, they agreed that they wanted to get back to being the best performing team. And they almost all, I think 80% of them, bought into it. And that journey actually enabled him then to get them at least into this growth mindset phase, which was a key part of his transformation strategy. So it wasn't directive. It was, involving them in shaping what became a vision that was co-created with the team members.
Yeah.
It was very, very powerful. And they then moved into the design phase, which was the action plan. Okay, what are we going to do now to get to our dream goal? They wanted to be the team that everyone else in the company wanted to come and join. That's how they defined success. It wasn't hitting a quota. It wasn't a target. Targets were part of it, but it was doing something exciting.
Yeah.
It was the purpose, the why, the Simon Sinek why came through very strongly. And so they began to get noticed. They saw that other teams were beginning, something's happening over here. What are these guys in the old Sinek? They're walking around with their heads held up sort of higher. But this was recognizing, this was empowerment and potential, coming back to those mindsets we spoke about earlier on. And by the end of, the following year, because he took over in September, then the last quarter of the year was a disaster for them. And then by the end of the following year, I think they were 30% over quota and really back on stream. And then, of course, he got promoted and someone else sort of came in. But it was a very interesting journey of creating the right culture to allow him then to coach. And so with every deal that they were looking at, they came back to the mindsets. They looked at, with the account plan, the opportunity plan, they came back to the mindsets to kind of evaluate, are we doing enough? Pushing the boundaries, how can we do better? But it's recognizing sometimes very small things, small phrases, small words that are used in a sales conversation can completely transform the outcome of the conversation. And the manager who's in tune with the kind of conversations that are going on between salespeople and their customers should be looking for those things that can transform a sales conversation. And it could be around creativity or tactful audacity or just knowledge of the customer or whatever. It's difficult to be specific, but
Yeah.
once you're aware of what the mindsets are, you can look at a phone call, a meeting. You can then start to evaluate, were we authentic enough? Was our presentation just top and tailing a presentation we've done before with a new logo? It's all of, how can we break down the barriers when we start the presentations? Do we start with us or do we start with the customer? Down to client centricity. So, I mean, you've obviously got a huge amount of experience in working with, startups and with large corporates. And, what have been some of your key learnings from the experiences that you've had?
Some key learnings. One is very important. If the sales leader or the leadership team of your company does not believe in what you're doing, you're going to fail.
Okay.
It does not matter how much work you put, how many hours, how many nights you don't sleep. If there's not a belief in the function, you are going to fail. And it's not personal. It's not about your abilities. It is not about your intelligence. It is they're not going to believe in what you bring. So that's the first lesson. And if you feel or if you see that there's not a belief in enablement, get out of that company.
Can I just stop you there before you move on to some of the other lessons? But because it's interesting that you've had experience with startups, and I don't know if these were venture capital or private equity led startups, but my experience of startups is that a number of them have been quite reluctant, to properly invest in sales enablement because they just want to, recruit more salespeople. If we need to sell more, just recruit more salespeople.
Oh my God, yes.
It's that sort of. So when you talk about, this needs to be brought in by the CEO, I just wonder whether you experience that the type of organization that you worked for, startup versus more mature, perhaps, whether that had an influence on this CEO philosophy that you talked about just now.
I think that, yes, this depends on how the CEO sees of what sales is going to do and how much the CEO kind of relies on their sales leadership, because that's another thing. The sales leader might be very into an enablement role and the CEO doesn't believe it. Then I would say, okay, then there's a disconnect there. I had CEOs of companies that asked me, these startups, but what is enablement? Like, we don't get it. We don't get why this is important. And I would tell them exactly what you said. Well, you can solve this problem many different ways, right? You need to sell and you have a quota and goals to achieve. You can do different things. You increase the price, you ask people to sell more, you hire more people to sell the same amount, but you have it in more people, or you make your people better. And the way to make your people better is by bringing enablement.
So I want to ask you yourself, and I ask this to so many people, what is personal change? And when I ask that question to people, I get a heavy mix of confused faces, blank stares, or just somebody trying to say, well, I'm really not sure. And that's really interesting because we need to understand what is personal change. And especially in sales, sales people and sales professionals are caught in between the organization itself and also the B2B and B2C customers that they support. So there's constant change that's happening to our salespeople, and not just salespeople, but leadership and operations and everybody within the organization. So first, I'd like to talk about organizational change. And we need to talk a little bit about this so that we can draw out the differences and review this so that we can understand how do we help the individual. Now, organizational change is a methodology and practice of implementing and processing change within business and within organizations. And you've probably seen some of the models I'm going to share with you today that we learned about in the master's program. And it's probably something that you are very commonly known about. You have a cognitive awareness of what is organizational change. So let's talk about that for just a moment before we go into what is personal change. Now, in the Sales Masters program, one of my favorite sections is Module 4. And that's where I really caught on to this. Organizational change is where we learn about, in leading sales transformation, you have to understand the concepts behind change and change management. And so we were taught about these different models. And you see here, Kurt Lewin's freeze model, unfreeze, change, and refreeze. You see the McKinsey 7S model, which is down below on the left-hand side. Shared values is at the center, but you have in the outer bands, structure, systems, style, staff, skills, and strategy. Now, then again, these are organizational change models. On the right, you see Kotter's 8 steps model. And in the center, he's focusing on, well, what are we doing? We're leading change. And the outer bands on the outer elements are the elements that he prescribes that leaders and management people should go through in order to execute change within the organization. And so we learned about this in the master's program, and we kept going with our learnings to see what was the viewpoint on all types of organizational change. Now, this was one that probably is common or more familiar to you. This is referenced back to Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the top graph, and it's called the SARA curve, SARA, which stands for shock, anger, resistance, and acceptance. Now, this is very interesting because there is no true unknown owner of who created this. And if you want to know my story of how I interviewed Ken Ross, which is the son of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, on did she create this? Well, I invite you to read my book because I had an in-depth interview with him about this model. But this version, as you see here, reactions to feedback, the SARA model, is accredited to Rogel. He created this version in use of 360 business feedback sessions for employees. Another popular one is called the ADKAR, and this is probably more dominant around the world. And this is Prosky's awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And this is where I get my most critical feedback, because there are so many certified and professional Prosky trainers and coaches that are out there. And when I talk about scared so what in personal change, it's commonly pointed right back to the D in desire. And they say, well, this is where personal change is described. And what happens, though, you can break the model very easily if you just ask this simple question. What happens when the individual rejects change? You can't go forward with the model. And typically in business leadership, we do not ask those types of questions to find out if the individual accepts a change, if they're on board with a change, or if they agree with a change.
Can I talk to you a bit about culture? Because I think culture is, there are these wonderful quotes that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Yeah. And, you must see culture quite closely because I guess HR is something that's really important, probably around the HR role. So could you tell me what your thoughts are around culture?
I'm actually personally always careful to use the word culture in an HR strategy because, culture is something that evolves. You cannot just design culture and implement culture. That is something that evolves throughout the years and also is part of a company's DNA. And then, of course, you have not only the company culture, but then you also have the different country cultures or the divisional cultures or the functional cultures, of the different sub-teams, depending on the leader you have. But of course, you see a difference. Like the company I am in today has a very strong people culture, very focused on people. And this goes back to the roots that, it was founded 75 years ago by the grandfather of our current CEO. So there's a long tradition of, we're building something good for the world and we're building something good for people. And we have managed to keep that DNA, which I really appreciate because it's not that the focus on people is like, okay, we have to have it in a slide and we have to have it in our values and okay, we move on. It is genuinely lived because there's also such a strong legacy in that company. And because of this family-owned dimension. But at the same time, in other companies, you also see a strong company culture that is created by the way you work, by the leadership, by the products, by the markets you're in. Is it fast moving? Is it slow moving? How do you sell to your customers? So in that sense, you do see a big difference. Can you change culture overnight? No, because this is again, culture is linked to people. And if you change too many people too radically, you lose a lot of intellectual capital, you lose experience, you lose knowledge. So you have to be mindful how you drive those type of changes. But of course, over time, when you bring in a different caliber of people that are in line with the strategy, you start shifting from a cultural point of view. So it impacts.
Yeah. So what would you, I mean, do you have a point of view about if you were to be asked the question, what's more important, having an organization with the right culture, but the wrong strategy, or the right strategy, but the wrong culture?
Well, I wouldn't pick either one of them because you need both.
You need both. Okay. I thought I'd put you on the spot with that question, but it's an interesting one, isn't it?
It is an interesting one because I have seen companies with the right culture, but with the wrong strategy, you will not get anywhere. Your business results will not be there. And then eventually it started impacting your culture because you maybe have to lay off people, you have to downsize, you have to cut budgets. There is a travel freeze, a hiring freeze, a expenditure freeze, which doesn't really positively impact the culture of, how do we work and how do we do things together.
Well, one of the topics that we also wanted to cover, Hanke, is how easy has it been being a female going through the sales world, because there are not many people who get up to the level that you're at. So has it ever bothered you, or have there been any glass ceilings that you had to break through in order to get to where you're at? I know that SAP is a great believer in diversity, and so, it's something that they encourage, I'm sure, but still the stats in the sales world that it's mainly male orientated, I think.
First of all, I never experienced challenges here, and probably I was lucky to meet really people who gave me a trust, who gave me a chance, and who give me the opportunity. And so really, as I told you, as a part of this M&A team, I was 28, and
really young.
So it's something that I believe this is something that now making for me the importance factor that for the young generation, it's so important to give them a chance with no limitation.
Okay. Yeah.
Because then you can really discover talents.
Yeah.
But if the young generation is not getting those opportunities, then we should lose those talents because those people probably even will resignate on their own, let's say, possibilities. So what I believe is, being a female in sales, I'm always struggling that a female afraid to go to sales because it's very stressful job. And probably this is the reason why they afraid. On the other side, I see a lot of our strengthness, something that it's helping a lot with the sales and with all the things what also we touch during the master, because really a problem solving, how we should really generate the ideas, the empathy, the communication, all those things. I believe we are really ready and capable to become leaders. But what probably is something that it's locking or not locking, it's really, influencing very much that we still don't see so many females is the role models. Because this is something that usually it's not about that you have a quota or that you have a special programs and so on. I always believe that the main trigger and main change, it's coming when you are having enough role models. And it's not only about one or two. And always I'm saying, don't compare yourself with me because I'm already on some level that of course you need to go step by step. And if you will be now dreaming to become MD or to become a sales director, probably you will see this dream as something that it's very, very far. And I think that what we need to do, and one of also my activities what I'm doing, because I'm also taking a lot of keynote speeches and panel discussions, is encouraging the young generation to, let's say, dreaming about my next job, but not the final one. Because if I will be just dreaming about, okay, my next career is something, my next job should be this, and next job, and so on. Or if I am dreaming to become MD, of course, your readiness and your ability to move will be different, because this MD should be too long. And, something that we also talk about, that if you see that you need to really invest for a very long time and you don't see the results and you are not feeling the satisfaction, then probably you can lose the motivation and you can really use the energy to invest to that more. So this is what I believe it's very important for having more females in leadership and especially in sales. So I think it's great to bring students and just give them the chance, don't afraid that they will make a mistake. This is something that I'm seeing biggest difference between, I'm not really experienced in other European cultures, so I will be talking only about Czech.
Sure.
That we are still so much afraid to make mistakes, comparing to US, for example. Philip, if I may, because this week I found one very interesting concept or theory, let's put it this way. And it's about the serendipity, if you know it.
Serendipity, yeah. Okay.
And it was first time I really had a chance to little bit explore more details about this model. And I have to say that it's answering a lot of, let's say, questions why somebody is more successful than the other. Because, and this is something what I like it on this model very much, because it's very simple. By your DNA, by your behavior, by your setup that you cannot influence, but you as a person are capable to see the opportunities where the others are not seeing these opportunities, and you are ready to take those opportunities. And I think that this is also some combination, because if you are, let's say, more open for even surprises and really taking those opportunities positively, this is something that usually it's coming back to you. And I always was like, how come, how it's possible that it's really working positively? And like discussion about, the lucky people and more the people that are not so much lucky. But this serendipity is really very nice describing this one. So I found this model, and definitely I want to figure out more about that, because it's very interesting that sometimes you feel that, it's pity I'm not so lucky like that person, but it's the lucky is not just like something that it's coming without any other reasons behind. So I want to learn more. I don't know if you had the experience with this model or the theory.
No, but as you're talking, I'm trying to recall, and I'm probably misquoting this, is serendipity is where preparation and chance combine, something like that. Preparation, because it's quite interesting. It's whether, and I know we speak quite a lot about mindsets, and like you were just saying, that where you're able to see things that maybe other people don't see, and how much of this comes back down to this sort of curiosity, growth mindset, proactive creativity for seeing or making things happen, and then having the courage, the tactful audacity to have the courage to make something happen, to believe you can do it. So how much of serendipity is caused by having a combination of these mindsets, I think is, are you going to make this the subject of your final project, or is
No, I'm not extending,
Not extending, yeah.
I have already enough. No, but what I believe, especially nowadays, what I am observing is really that people are somehow, of course, we have a lot of new stress and a lot of unknown things, and it's really happening all around and coming from even the areas that you always believe that are something like secure positions, that during COVID that kids can go to school. All these things totally changed our foundation and our basics, that the people are under the highest stress and so on. So, and what I'm observing is that the people are saying, but he's lucky. And that is lucky, and I'm not lucky. And then you are just thinking, okay, but how it's possible that somebody is more lucky than the other ones? So I was just like curious about that, because actually I am definitely feeling myself as a lucky person that I'm always having in the right moment, meeting the right people and
Yeah.
showing me the new opportunities and giving me the chance that in a few months, years, you just can really judge or
Yeah.
can really name it as the very important and very positive. So therefore, I was looking, how come that it's happening like that? But it's very much also very much definitely connected to all what you said about the mindset, about
Yeah.
the ability or a readiness of people to
Yeah.
challenge themselves and to, let's say, maintain their setup. Because
Yes.
if you are just like keeping like it is, usually there is no progress.
So lessons learned, Mike. What for you were some of the highs and the the great lessons you think you learned that you got, and also what for you were some of the highs, some of the lows, or what would have been some of the most fun deals you've worked on, and perhaps what made it fun?
Well, most of them have been fun actually, because if you're going to be with people for so long, you have to make it fun. It's absolutely imperative that people smile every day. A lot of hard work. I guess the most disappointing deal that we did was a big European. I'll make it non-specific.
Yes.
Bank in the early days, where we knew exactly what we needed to do to win, and the board wouldn't give us the leverage to do it on sign off.
Is this the board? You meaning HP at the time?
We're talking HP here, yeah. So
I see.
HP.
So it was HP's decision not to go ahead.
It was HP's decision to really come out the deal and not offer the customer exactly what we could have offered.
Okay.
Yeah. So that biggest disappointment. Lessons learned. Probably wouldn't have asked the board for permission next time.
Okay. But presumably you had risk committees, didn't you? I mean, we had a process you have to go through in order to get these deals through. But
you do. But there's the thing is, when you're doing deals, that the shape of a deal after a negotiation is nothing like the shape of a deal before you go into the negotiation. Well, so that's probably a bit of an extreme. It changes significantly from the start of a negotiation to the end of a negotiation.
Right.
Typically, when you're running big responses to complex documents, procurement and a few technical people, they'll put an RFP together.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's very generic. There's a lot of information missing, and it's big. And the idea when you get an RFP is that they're not selecting people; they're deselecting people when you get an RFP. So it's not it's a deselection process at the beginning, and then you go into the next phase, which is BAFO, and you're still bidding based on a basic requirement that they've put together in an RFP. So you then put BAFO, and then you're into selection of maybe two from three or 2 from 4, and then you take 2 into negotiation. And when you get into negotiation, that's when all the specifics start to come onto the table, and actually you can shape the deal. So it's a little bit like when you get a builder and he gives you a quote, and then you start asking for extras afterwards. Okay. It's not quite as, you have to be very specific and help the customer understand where the deviation is from the original request. And it's important to get that right in a very collaborative way with the customer. But in the last part of the deal, everything changes. And a lesson learned, by the way, is in that process, things are changing for a reason. And the reason things change is because the competition that you're bidding against is coming up with some really good ideas. Okay. So it changes the ground that you're on constantly. So one of the lessons learned is you need to be the one that's in competition that's coming up with all the good ideas that then backfoots your competition. And so when you get to the winning post, if you like, you've got lots of these ideas left in your back pocket in case the competition try and back foot you. So so that's a quite a key lesson learned.
Yeah.
But I guess the sort of lessons from that particular one was we should have really in the qualification phase set the expectation of what we needed to do in order to win, in order that our executive committee bought into the situation.
Okay. Is that more an internal pitch you're saying?
Managing your internal stakeholders is as important as managing your customer stakeholders. Especially on big deals or anything that deviates in any way from standard and operating procedure within an organization. You really have to get all the key people lined up and on board within your own organization. Absolutely essential. And lesson learned from that was, I whimsically said probably wouldn't have told them, but I probably would have told them when I was certain of the shape of the deal, rather than telling them sort of it towards the end of it, towards the middle of it. And lesson learned, really stringently managing the stakeholder communication all the way through the deal to make sure there's no surprises for them.
Yeah.
So critical on that one. So that was the deal that we won, that we lost. The customer wanted us, but we decided not to go ahead. In fact, it's the only deal that I've earned a bonus on that I didn't actually sign. So,
Oh wow! You still got your bonus.
The company recognised their position and they gave us a bonus. It was a token, but it was a gesture. So.
Well, that's interesting, because that speaks a lot to the values of Hewlett Packard, because not every company would do that, as you probably found out in your career.
Yes, I'm certainly,
yeah.